We had that with council.
Hello, Lauren Bernardi. I'd like to welcome you here. I guess you're here to give us some corporate training on what are we here for?
This is for our workplace harassment, staff relations, all that kind of bundled into one. So just for council's information, you will do training as it relates on HR downloads for workplace violence and harassment training, but there has been recommendations that there actually be in-person training because I think it you benefit from having that in-person training. And Lauren has been doing some of these sessions, I know, across the province and is well known for her wonderful training sessions and preparing council for the things that they need to know when dealing with codes of conduct and workplace violence and harassment, et cetera. So I will turn it over to Lauren Bernardi.
Great, thank you. I'll just try and do this as I'm talking. I'll move around. Do you want to maybe come down
that
this
might be a
end
good
a little
idea,
bit,
so
or
we're not
even
making you
sit there? Because then you can also.
Got a chair here.
Dawn's coming.
Oh, Don's coming? I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
just
we don't have a chair
Put a
there.
couple of chairs down here, and then we'll be all.
This one.
Yeah,
Sit right in front of us here.
perfect.
You can have this chair.
Did you get? You've got hands. Everybody's got a copy of the slides, so you can take notes. Okay, great. So thank you, Karen, for the introduction. Some of you I've met before. I'm a lawyer, and I'm based in Mississauga, and I do a lot of work with municipalities and municipal councils on how to lead together effectively. I also do a lot of work in terms of investigations. I've investigated municipal officials and the mayor of Sarnia, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that one and what happened in that situation, because there were some procedural things that were a little bit different in that one. Excuse me, but a lot of municipalities have decided to start the term off on a different footing, because there has been what I would say is almost an epidemic of issues where councillors are maybe not behaving the way that they should be, or mayors. We're starting to take a look at maybe how do we start this relationship out on the right footing? What do we need to do to be able to work together effectively? And I'm really happy to see that you have staff here as well, because this is a partnership. It's a team. And so we're going to talk today about what it takes to create an effective team, what it takes to create a constructive, effective council. So that's kind of the overview of what we're going to talk about. Now, I always encourage people to participate via my bribery bag, and I apologize to those of you whose New Year's resolution was not to eat this stuff. But if you want to tell yourself you're being healthy, there are raisins in here. And I think there's something called sensations, so you can fool yourself and tell yourself you're eating fruit if you really want to do that. But to encourage participation, good question, good answer, something funny, and we'll pull from the bag. If you have a device with you, it'd be great if you don't have it sitting in front of you, if we can just kind of focus in the room. And that's kind of it, but I do encourage you to speak up, including arguing with me if you don't agree with what I have to say. Because what we're going to talk about is really relationships between people. We're talking about what's appropriate and not appropriate in terms of our interactions. And we will all have different views on what that means. And so I do encourage you to talk about that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about understanding our perspectives. And I'm not going to just stand up here and talk. I'm going to give you some work to do over the course of the next few hours, including an exercise we're going to do right now. So we're going to talk about what creates differences in perception. We all see the world differently, and there are things that affect how we see the world. So I'm going to give you working in groups of 3. It works out really well. You're going to sit here.
Oh, you poor
I'm going to
guy.
give you a couple of minutes to come up with things that might influence how you see the world. Things that are personal to us as individuals, things outside of us that may affect how we see the world. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do it, so don't start yet. And then the group that gets the most.
Stuck with me.
Okay. So, start now.
Okay. Personal and external factors. You want to talk about personal?
Be the way you're.
Family history?
Experiences?
Yeah,
Family?
Oh, I guess I'm here.
You're here, yeah.
How you grew up?
Yeah,
Family, yeah.
Personal factors.
What else?
so that's financial,
Financial,
that's race,
I would put upbringing,
Race.
because that really drives how
Culture.
culture.
your outlook. on-
culture, religion.
If you live near Don.
Yep.
Even I think like
Yeah.
you're saying
Well, I guess they're all, yeah. What about external factors?
Mental health, right?
External factors.
External factors is maybe, yeah, geography.
Those is
Like financial, financial I think is in this one too, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
oh okay yeah.
Okay, what else is external? Family members, that's external too, right?
Yeah, so internal, are we talking internal, then it would be
But our case is
What influences
we
your
may have
perception?
full
Got one more
media.
minute.
Media.
Gender.
Other people.
We already have that one.
sex, so gender.
Interactions with other people.
Okay.
But
Yep, next.
Creed.
traumatic,
You are a creed or not.
you know, can really dictate.
Well, we have culture, that's culture
yeah.
slash creed.
Yours
Okay.
be an external
I'm trying to think of all the intersections.
or sorry,
Could really bring something to the forefront, or could
I think that,
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
give them 4.
Disability.
I guess personal.
Well, duh.
That could be in both, couldn't it? Particular activities, would that be under
Okay.
particular activities?
We don't have a lot of external.
what would
What else? Geography, financial, family, media.
Your community, your friends, your peer group.
Where you are,
Seconds.
where, like, kind of like your
Friends.
location, where you're.
environment,
Peer group.
where you live?
Yeah,
Like,
sure, yeah.
We have religion under personal, so we'll leave it there.
I think that would be external.
Socioeconomic.
Yeah.
Okay, time's up. Count how many you have in total.
400.
Eight. Eight's the number to beat. 7. Beat
That
it.
doesn't
In which
beat it.
one? In both?
Total, yeah.
Oh, we're
1, 2,
way
3,
above
4,
that,
5.
guys. 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We have 10.
10?
18.
Maybe some people.
Most I ever had was 27, but here you go.
That's only, well,
I think so too.
not quality.
Yeah, I don't care about quality. All right, tell us what you have.
Under personal?
And listen to see if there's any, or hear if there's any that they didn't get that you did.
Family, how you grew up, financial, race, culture, religion, gender, age, sexual orientation, and disability.
Okay, all of it? Okay. Anything that you got that they didn't get?
Nina, you spoke too fast.
Oh, sorry, did I?
That's a cultural thing.
We have friendships. I don't know if that would.
Friendships would make a difference, yeah.
And mental health we have too, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, what was the one you said? Mental?
Personal, we have life-changing events.
It's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Need some candy.
Give it to you because if you don't need it, I will.
Come on, team.
What else might there be?
Personal skill sets. Politics.
Did any of you have media, social media on
Oh,
there?
we had media.
We had media.
Yeah, yeah, so those sorts of things will affect us. There's even little things like, did you get enough sleep last night? Are you hungry? I don't know about the rest of you, but I get really hangry and agitated if I'm hungry, and I don't really focus on what the person's telling me, I just need to eat. So each of those things can play a role in how we see the world. The problem is that we have what I call the reality gap, which is that we tend to think that everyone else sees the world the same way that we do. We forget that other people come with all of these other experiences and backgrounds. And when we're analyzing an issue or discussing an issue, it sometimes doesn't make sense to us why they see the world the way they do, why they see industry the way they do. Because you think, well, I've got all the same data, and like, you're wrong, I'm right. But maybe if you had the same lived experience, the same background, you would reach the same conclusions. But we just forget that there are different perspectives. And those perspectives can be driven by so many things. Gender plays a big difference in how we see the world. There's lots of books written on communication styles between men and women and how they differ. We really do kind of speak a different language. Even our experience is different. And so as women, we are often taught to protect ourselves from harm. by doing certain, from sexual assault, but by doing certain things. So don't go out at night. Check your car if you've gone, shopping or to pay for gas, check the back seat of the car. When I was in law school, this was the years before cell phones, I would go to the pub with my friend, and we lived in different buildings. And so we'd walk together as far as we could. We'd run to our respective buildings and yell, "I'm safe, I'm safe." My husband, he will sleep with the sliding glass doors open to our bedroom at night if he's alone. There's no way I will ever do that. So for the men in the room, how many times have you had to have that thought? How many times do you have to think about those things? Do you worry about your drink when you're at a pub, having to make sure nobody puts anything in it? Of course not. And so that changes how we experience interactions from each other. It's not a right or wrong, it's just that our experience is so different. So when it comes to things like sexual attraction, particularly in the workplace, if a woman is receiving unwanted sexual attention, it may feel different than if a man is experiencing unwanted sexual attention, because this need to be afraid has been drilled into us. And a lot of times it's misplaced fear. Like, we're afraid of things we don't even need to be afraid of, but nonetheless that's there. So it changes our interaction. There's a lot of talk about white privilege and how we don't necessarily appreciate the privilege we have when we are white, that the experience of someone of color is very, very different. And the story I always tell is about a nanny I had for my children when they were younger. And she had gone to Canadian Tire and she bought a tote, a Rubbermaid tote bin for me to store some stuff in. And she got back to our place and realized she had forgotten the lid. She had the receipt, well, she didn't have the lid. So she went back to Canadian Tire with the bin itself and her receipt and said, "I just forgot the lid. Can I go get the lid?" And they accused her of stealing the tote box, and they shut down the cache and insisted on looking at security footage to make sure she hadn't gone into the aisle to steal the bin. I'm pretty sure if I had gone in, white woman in a suit, I would have experienced a different kind of treatment, right? We forget these things sometimes. We don't realize the difference in how people experience the world. And so I think it's important to try and gain that perspective and really step back when we're engaging in debate with other people, that maybe they're just as right as you are because they're coming from a different perspective. In terms of this context, what would be a perspective of counselors? So what is it that affects how you see the world? What are the influences on your perspective? What affects your decision making?
Socioeconomic,
Yeah.
whatever we did for a living, where we grew up,
Yes?
who our neighbors are,
Yeah.
our peer groups, how we're involved in the community, our experience with other politicians growing up.
Yes?
You know.
That will affect it. What else affects how you make your decisions?
Constituents.
Yeah. Usually the loud ones, right? The most vocal ones. But that can affect how you interpret things. What are your particular vulnerabilities? What are elected officials vulnerable to?
Bias.
Criticism? Ultimately, what's your biggest vulnerability?
Conflict of interest,
Maybe.
bias, built-in
No.
bias.
What's your greatest risk? If people don't like you?
Re-election?
Sorry? Yes.
What?
You might not get reelected.
Re-election.
I know, but I never thought of that.
So there are things that influence your decision-making that would be things like constituent wishes. What does the community want? You have to take that into account because you're elected in order to do that, right? And then thinking about the municipality as a whole. So sometimes you have a vocal minority that aren't necessarily representing the views of the entire community, but they're the ones that tend to speak up. And what about from a staff perspective? What would be the influence on staff? What would be staff vulnerabilities?
The counselors, the mayor.
Yes, very much so. What about that relationship makes it challenging? Because there's lots of things, but what might make that challenging as a staff member?
Well, they're qualified for their job. We're not, but we might think we are because we were elected.
You getting a chocolate?
You're getting in trouble.
You getting another chocolate?
That was so good. Thank you.
Yeah. What do you want?
Chocolate.
Same one?
Thank you, sure.
All right, that's a good one.
Allergic to
What
nuts?
else?
Public.
No,
Or is it
I just may
Public,
be
yes.
nuts.
And what does the public do when it comes to the job?
Bitch a lot. Treat to grow at times, I guess.
Yeah, sometimes I think there is a perception that when you work for a municipality, you should have a tough skin and you should tolerate criticism. But sometimes that criticism goes beyond criticism of decisions and becomes personal attacks.
Yep.
And that can be very difficult. And one of the vulnerabilities for people who are in a staff position is you don't have the public forum to be able to defend yourself, right? You can't go on Facebook and argue with the mayor. There are things that you just can't do. And so it makes there to be a higher degree of vulnerability and powerlessness. And so those are some of the things we have to think about when we're interacting with each other. Ultimately, you're all making the best decisions you can with the information that is in front of you. But you do need to work together. And so we're going to do another exercise here because I think sometimes it's helpful to take a step back and think, as a council, what do we need from staff in order to be able to do our job well? And from staff, what do we need from council? So I'm going to put the flip chart here, and then I'm going to put a piece of paper over here on that table. And we're just going to divide up into 2 groups. And I'd like you to have, or I'm not going to use that paper. I'd like you to have a mix of staff and council, so that it's not staff on one side and council on another. Because you're going to have an opportunity to work on both. So on this side, it's going to be what council needs from staff. And the other side is what staff needs from council. You're going to spend a couple of times generating a list, and then we're going to switch. Okay? So.
Moving over there.
Okay. What side are we on?
Staff needs from council.
Are you live? But I want it to be roughly equal. So this is what staff needs.
So what are we on, Don?
We're doing what council needs from.
So are we,
We're only 2 counselors and 4 staff. Does
Unbiased.
that matter?
Informed.
yes, we're,
Hang on, wait, keep those good.
You gotta come up and.
We're coming up there.
Oh, I have to come up and write it? Okay. You asked for it.
I'll write if
Oh, okay.
So do you have a mix, do you have a good mix? I do.
we all know that
Yeah.
Marker, you got a marker.
Catches up to what you said.
What council needs from staff?
Oh, unbiased, well-informed information and based on their experience and knowledge.
Be an expert on absolutely everything.
I'm out.
I'm going over to the staff group.
That was kind of a joke, but I mean, that's somewhat, I mean, you guys have a broad portfolio, I mean,
Yeah.
expertise, yeah.
Need spell check on flip charts.
Well, patience for us sometimes as well, because sometimes we ask questions that we may not know exactly how to ask it properly in your field of expertise. So I know I've benefited from when staff is patient and helps me untangle a knot.
The basics like availability, right? Like available to rules. Rules and regulations.
Yeah.
I think part of the communication is
Well, in general, just great communication skills, because it reiterates what Matthew was saying, that I might be saying something and I'm not quite verbalizing it properly, and you guys kind of read around and like, it happened
We have to
today,
interpret it.
Yeah.
right?
to assist with reporting, and I think that
Because we're halfway between knowing and not knowing.
What else do you guys need?
Commitment to stay your entire career here.
Yes. Oh, that's still what we need.
Striking it.
Yes.
And then, we'll go to the other side with that.
personal approach.
There's no doubt in my mind, there's commitment.
There's also confidentiality,
Good one.
because sometimes, we expose how unwise we are in some of the conversations, and we have confidential conversations here. I guess that speaks to the integrity piece.
Well, you could be approachable, you could be very cut and dry.
Now, we needed
Fair
someone.
treatment?
Yeah. Yes, equal treatment across council. Now, what about decorating the hall for Christmas? Yes, I know, but that's what I mean. It's a huge, right? It doesn't go unnoticed. We would miss it if it wasn't there. So good taste, interior decorating taste.
No, I think we're kidding. We can put holiday cheer on there if you like.
Well, decorating skills. Oh, customer service skills. Because we benefit from your ability to serve the residents.
When do we need that?
I think however many were pairs put down, right?
Yep. I'm gonna give you another 30 seconds, and then you're switching sides.
Oh.
I mean, physically or just paper-wise?
Paper-wise.
We can
No,
look at
I guess, yeah, that's.
But you were gonna work, we're
customer
gonna look at their
service,
paper
you
and
I have
then
discussed
see if
it.
there's anything that's missing on theirs.
Oh, I
So
see.
We can just move the papers if that's easier.
So we'll have an opportunity to criticize their work.
Positive work
Excellent.
environment, positive experience for
For residents. and-
residents coming in, and that's kind of under the customer service umbrella there, but just,
Positive attitude,
yeah.
is that,
Yeah.
yeah?
Attitude to you, yeah, Dave.
Trust me. You didn't want me being the scribe.
At a dude.
Okay, let's switch sides. So go to the other side and get a different color of marker.
Over there.
I'll leave them a red marker.
No.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, Don off.
Okay, you got a red one?
Just switch papers.
I want them to do red ones.
I'll go around the other side.
I'll go.
Are you sure, Matthew? Because I can easily, I can guide you around if you want.
I'll run around the other side.
I don't have an expertise in guiding now. I'm not. Okay, come around and then I'll meet you at the, yeah.
I'm not going. I just
Are we switching sides? Yeah.
Do I take?
So take a look at what they've done and see if there's anything you can think of that's not on there. Is there?
All right,
You got the red one.
that needs from council.
Carol, you're beautiful, right?
Chairs here. Here, you want to take my arm? There's the chair to your right. I'm gonna put my arm down on it. You're good? Okay, cool.
They all stood.
Recommendations? Lauren, we're just to add whatever we
Add
think they
anything you
missed.
can think of that's not on their
Okay,
list.
so I'll read what
Let's
they
read it,
have on
yeah.
their list. They have support, communication, direction, trust, accessibility, understanding, direction, and assistance.
Recommendations and analysis.
Personable.
Approachable,
Approachable.
compromise, uniformity, consistency, clarity, and loyalty.
It's a pretty darn good list.
It is. You remember when we first met? We used to put umbrella. I see council staff. Provide some.
I don't see
like
anything
an
on
umbrella
analysis.
for staff, right?
There was no finance.
Protect them.
Maybe it kind
Support
of
them
goes.
in the public's, view.
I think that's a good one, just
But how do you
protection
say
in the
that?
public view.
Different, like analysis includes like what do other.
Yeah, I like where you're going with that.
Mhm.
Pros and cons
You have
of
to,
an issue.
you have to look after your staff.
Options?
And
Is options in there?
Why don't we put,
Well, analysis would
Is
be-
how do we word that? Karen, scribe?
It's already there probably.
Yeah.
well, no. It's nice to have options. It is, but it's not, because it's in there under support, it's under loyalty, but,
Direction and assistance, understanding,
Protection.
trust.
Because when we get a phone call critical of staff, we can't pile in and say, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that Nina, she's so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you're the only one we do it.
I learned a lot about the 11th concession the last little while.
That was Nina's fault. She drives on it, other times she goes home.
Specialization of all the positions, the treasury and the clerks and building. Days of one night doing everything.
Well, accessibility.
Being accessible.
3.1 qualified for
Yeah.
staff needs.
Boy, I have respect for
Respecting the chain of command, right? As council, you have one staff member.
the CAO.
Yep. And so. then
Understanding,
the
is that
CEO
in here?
handles all your staff stuff, so that's one to be very mindful of.
Accountability.
I was just gonna.
That's a good word.
But you gotta respect that.
Let's add that.
We have to uphold in their qualifications. Right, we have to, it's already there under support.
I wish the public would respect the chief.
But
Yeah.
Maybe go through some channels before just pulling the fire alarm and just screaming
Like that.
I know.
What about being prepared for council meetings? Having read
Oh, yeah.
reports?
Oh, yeah, that's a, yeah.
Yep.
Loyalty?
That's the one that was said.
We assume that's a given because you guys are just on top of that.
That's a good point.
That's a good point.
Yeah, prepared for meetings. Yeah, we have to do our homework and prepare ourselves. We can't expect staff to do things.
What about the aspect of notification in the sense that you're not blindsiding your staff? Right, like, you know, if you have an idea, you know,
So
drop-
Heads up,
Yeah, give people
yeah.
asking the
know.
questions ahead of time so they can come in. And they may still ask the question in open council so people can hear the questions, but then they have the ability to come prepared. It makes it more efficient too.
Yeah.
Well, it looks better, then they, not only does the public see it being done.
I think it would,
right?
yeah.
They can see it done, as opposed to doing it all before the meeting. You get to ask the question, you'd be seen doing your job, and they get to answer the question, they're seen doing their job.
We did that
It's a
today.
win-win.
Respecting staff, maybe this was on the other
Yeah.
list.
Yeah.
It's all about perspective, so, you know, like.
Oh, cheering for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Or the Oilers.
Or if we're New York, it has to be the Vikings.
Yeah.
I was wearing an Oilers
And,
hat
you know,
the other day, I just had to stop
appreciate
the
you
office.
guys.
So
Complaints.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, how do you, it's just not all roses.
Like, when will my roses repay?
Yes.
When stuff tells us.
Yeah, because we also forward them, like, often when I get a phone call or an issue, I'll
Mayor's walk last year.
identify it, phone them. That's the same sort of thing as being prepared for a meeting, phone one, phone.
Complaining about things, but it was about.
About respecting the staff expertise.
Yeah, that's, isn't that in there?
Okay. That are understanding.
Because you may
Not
not
quite,
like,
but
you may
yeah.
not like the recommendation that staff
Oh, yeah.
makes,
Well,
but you
that-
can
yeah.
still respect that they're making that recommendation based on their particular
Perspective.
expertise. Yes. So you can disagree without,
Understanding also what
Their perspective,
their
right?
perspective, what they're doing.
Well, I guess they said understanding, but understanding of the role,
yeah.
the differences in the role.
Yep.
Not just info, but, it may be a good sign that we're having trouble coming up with these things, because they obviously haven't floated to the top as a problem.
Yeah.
It's a pretty long list.
Yeah, maybe, you know. But the first list was pretty, we understood it.
Okay, let's go back to your seats.
Okay.
And we'll talk
That
about some
wasn't
of
hard.
these.
Good job, guys.
Oh, sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
Lauren helped us.
We feel like your husband's laughing.
What's that?
Yeah, especially you, Gerald, your contribution.
Okay, so when you came to do it the second round, you wouldn't have seen what the second round of answers are, so we'll talk a little bit about these. But I think a lot of it comes from understanding what each side's role is, right? Staff's role is to use their expertise to come up with the best recommendations in their view, and council's role is to decide whether or not that's the route they want to go. You won't necessarily agree. Sometimes there are political or community reasons why you don't want to accept a recommendation. But you each have those roles to play. So when we look about what council needs from staff, some additional pieces might be things like providing recommendations and advice and options, providing consistency, appreciation, understanding,
Appreciation, that's a good one.
yeah, feedback. One of the things I think sometimes is a challenge is having the courage to make a recommendation that you know might not be popular, right? So courage sometimes comes up on that side. It's gonna come up on the other one too. So these are some important things that we need staff to do. What are some of the things that we need council to do for staff? I'll just hold it up a little bit. But I came over and talked to the group because there's some things that I see commonly in different municipalities that happen where we kind of forget what our roles are. And one of the big ones that happens is forgetting to respect the chain of command. So how many employees does council have? One. Who's your employee? Karen. Yes, CEO. So if there's an issue involving staff, does the mayor or council go directly to staff, or do they supposed to go to Karen? Supposed to go to Karen, right? So we have to be mindful of that. And in smaller municipalities, it can be, you know, you less formal and a little more casual, and you forget sometimes that you can't do that. And there's lots of reasons why. From my perspective, because I'm all about respect, that's what my life's work is about, it's very difficult when you're a staff member if someone comes directly to you, because there is that power imbalance. They may be busy working on something else that might actually, from a municipal standpoint, be a bigger priority, but a council member comes and says, can you do this thing for me? Chances are they're going to drop everything else and do that thing for you because they feel that you should be given priority. So it changes the dynamic a little bit. So I think that one's an important one. And the other one, these two are kind of, they're kind of connected, but making sure you've read the reports and you come to council meetings prepared and you don't blindside staff. So if you've got a question, let them know ahead of time what that question's going to be. You may still ask it in an open council session because the public needs to hear the question, but it's far more efficient because then staff can be ready for you and then you can proceed with your meeting. And then respecting staff time as well, so the time it takes to do things. But courage falls here too. And one of the things that I've seen happen, and I give this as an example and I often see people laugh, but is stuff you're in a council meeting, you're talking about a particular issue, it becomes contentious, you've got members of the public here, and so what do? You boot it back to staff and say, we'd like to do further evaluation, because you're trying to avoid this hot button issue, and so you punt it back. And so I think that's where courage comes again. Courage, even in the face of strenuous opposition, to make a decision, unless there are valid reasons to send it back for reevaluation by staff. But don't do it as a conflict avoidance thing, because it's not efficient, then you never move forward. So some of those things, so courage I think is a word to keep in mind for everyone. What do I need to do to be able to do my role? And even with the vulnerabilities that I have, sorry, I just want to see it's respecting staff expertise. And that's even, what we were talking about earlier is that staff comes with a set of expertise. And maybe you have some knowledge of a particular area, and maybe you have a lot of knowledge in a particular area, but you're still not the expert. You're not the one who's taken the time to look at the reports, to do the in-depth analysis. So it's respecting that the person that's coming forward has that expertise. Ultimately, though, you're here to serve the same thing. You're here to serve your community, right? You have different roles in serving the community, but you're all trying to do what's right. And so understanding that and not engaging in, finger pointing or bad-mouthing each other. And really, the bad-mouthing I see happens mostly from council to staff. That staff becomes easy prey. And I'm not saying here, but I see staff becoming easy prey. That's a ridiculous answer. I can't believe staff's coming to that recommendation. And so that creates problems, especially when you consider vulnerabilities. Yeah, go ahead.
Are you suggesting members of council actually say that at open council meetings about a staff report?
I'm saying they put it there. I'm saying they put it on Facebook pages and blogs. They'll say things to the media. We have an epidemic in this province, and actually across the country. I did an article with a colleague from Municipal World Magazine on councillors behaving badly, and it was their #1 article for 2018. And we've had comments across the province, across the country, from different CAOs and different government bodies about what a challenge this has become, where councillors are treating staff very badly, and they're doing it in very public ways, not just at council meetings, but in social media, which creates a lot of problems. So we're going to talk a little bit about that issue today. So let's talk about building a constructive council. And there are different ways in which you can have culture on a council. It's very similar to a board-run organization. But the ideal is to be constructive, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute. But sometimes you see high conflict councils, and sometimes you see passive ones. And a passive council would be one that isn't really challenging anything staff comes forward with. It's kind of a rubber stamp. So staff comes in, they make a recommendation, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't see so much of that in councils. You see that sometimes in boards. You don't see that as much in councils. A high conflict council, you do see a lot of. And that's where you may have, say, 7 members on council, and every time there's a vote, it's 3 to 4, and it's always the same 3 and the same 4 voting, almost in little blocks, even though there are no parties. So you end up with these little factions that can happen. or even just kind of power plays and grandstanding in council so that you end up looking good, or it's the person who you have a vote, it's a democratic process, and you have a councillor walk out the door and say, well, that was a stupid vote. You know, I voted against it, and here's the reasons why I voted against it, to make you look good, instead of respecting the democratic process. So that creates conflict within council. A constructive council is really one that operates as a team. It's a council that does the things that we just talked about in those flip charts. It engages each other respectfully, and it respects each other's opinions. So instead of thinking of it as a personal thing, it's the person has a different viewpoint because they have a different perspective from me. And it's very thoughtful. And it ultimately provides the best leadership. It comes up with the best decisions. So when we are constructive, which doesn't mean when we don't disagree. Disagreement is helpful. It's destructive disagreement that's not. And I like this quote from Bill Clinton, but when times are tough, constant conflict may be good politics. But in the real world, cooperation works better. After all, nobody's right all the time, and a broken clock is right twice a day. I believe that our current U.S. president may not be familiar with this concept. Chaos. So let's talk a little bit about conflict. And this is another quote I like, which is 10% of conflicts are due to difference in opinion, and 90% are due to the wrong tone of voice. Right? So much of what we gauge in conflict about is the wrong tone of voice, or the absence of a tone of voice and body language where we're communicating in, say, text messages or emails. That's where we see a lot of communication barriers. And that's when, fights happen because, disagreements happen because we are not getting the benefit of seeing somebody smile or seeing their tone, and they're not saying it in an angry way, and then somebody gets their back up. And so all of these things have an impact. But there are a number of things that produce conflict. Just in general, conflict in general, I'm not talking about just in council, but conflict in general. So I will go through each of them. One of them is interest. So maybe we have a personal agenda. We've come to council, not necessarily like a personal agenda, I need to promote myself, but I've come onto council because of a particular issue that I think needs to be handled differently in the township, so I'm coming on and I'm going to make sure that I get that interest met. So that can create some challenges. Value conflicts. We may have differences of opinion about how much we should govern people's lives, whether or not this should become a more urban area or we keep it rural, what are our values for the community. That can create some tension. Structural conflicts doesn't happen as much, but are there things within how an organization is structured that can create problems? Relationship conflicts. Whoops, just not liking each other. And that's going to happen. You're all thrown together. You're not necessarily going to be best buds. You're not necessarily all going to see things eye to eye, and that can create problems. Even different personalities can create problems. So you may have one person who's a detail-oriented person and then somebody else who's a big picture person. And that creates clashes because the big picture person's like, oh, we're getting hung up in the details. And the detail person's like, you're missing some important information here. What we need are both. But when we have both, sometimes we get frustrated with each other. Oh, come on. So that creates challenges. And then data conflicts. And data conflicts can be we each have different information, or it can be we each read it differently, so we interpret it in a different way, or some of us read it all and some of us read part of it, right? So that's why it's so important to come to council meetings prepared so that we are eliminating one of the sources of conflict. Let's make sure we've read everything, we've understood it. If we have questions, we ask them ahead of time, because all of these things help to reduce conflict. Recognizing that other people have different backgrounds and personalities will also help to minimize conflict. And so when it comes to municipal councils, they breed conflict. And part of it is you're passionate. You're here because you want to serve a community. You're not here because, you needed a job and there's nothing else you could do. You're here because there is some personal connection for you. But you also have competing demands from constituents that will have, you're never going to satisfy everybody 100% of the time, right? You're not going to satisfy the entire township with any decision you make. You may get a majority, but there may still be unhappy people, which means you're also working in an adversarial, competitive environment. And so all of these things play a role. And after a while, you start out now, you're fresh, you're happy, you're ready to go. And after a while, you make decisions and you disagree and somebody's not listening and you think that person is a problem and it starts to wear you down. So it's trying to keep in mind all of these things so that you don't get to that stage. Okay, so there are some barriers that we sometimes experience when it comes to having a constructive council. And I've got 3 things down here. Then I'm going to divide you into 3 groups. I think when we did it by 3s, we were 4 groups, right? So we'll do by 4s. So 4, 4, and 4. Love it when the numbers work out. I want this group over here to talk about group dynamics. So how in a setting of council can the dynamics that happen within a group impact your ability to be constructive and work harmoniously? Don't look ahead. Over here, I want to talk about the implications of things like face saving. So how can that play a role in making it challenging to have good constructive discussions and decisions? And then over here, I want you to talk about things like mistrust, because that's often what happens after a while when there's conflict, trust goes down. So what does that look like? So for each of these things, what does it look like? What's the impact of it? And how can we solve it? So what does it look like? What's the impact? And how can we resolve it? So 4 people here. You 4 are going to be here, and then over here. Hi, guys.
Can we trust you?
We got the chocolate bag.
I'll give you an sort of you
Never took it away from us.
I campaign.
Okay, so mistrust, what does it look like?
Okay, right, and I come in and go, oh, this might be harder to do that. Yeah.
I mean, like, just on a council meeting, if you're not trusting the advice where it comes from, then obviously it makes it pretty difficult to make decisions, right?
Yes.
Yeah, then you
Yes, for council.
question everything.
Everything.
People tell everything.
What are we trying to, and
So you're trying to, what
Probably
do you,
devious.
like, so identifying it, did for you, but you could talk about it in other ways. What's the
It's
impact?
hard because we're not in that
Get
situation.
around
No.
it? How can you?
But it would
make sure
change
that
your,
doesn't
like,
become
day-to-day
a
dynamics, right?
barrier?
It would change your day-to-day communication with the person, and then eventually how you go about making a decision, right?
You're just trying to, I guess.
Well, it would. Trying to think of a situation. Stifle communications, I would expect. It would-
Yeah, so like on to impact, yeah, it would reduce communication. It wouldn't lead to,
Okay.
like, I just think it would make really bad working relationships, right? If you have mistrust.
What this is, or this is the right decision, that you're almost forcing yourself
You think
to
of-
go against what you think, because you've got the information.
Trying to think of a situation I've been in where I didn't trust the people I was working with.
or the opposite?
Well, you're stressed. You would. Trying to think of.
I'm thinking,
Like, I think in terms of like a council, right? Like where a counselor, where you would get mistrust is if you feel that your staff isn't guiding you or giving you all the best information, the most valuable information, isn't giving you their professional capacity, right?
If I mistrusted another member of council, I felt there was some hidden agenda they weren't bringing forward, or
That too.
there was a secondary. How would that?
How do you react to that?
Like you just okay. To me, it'd just be okay. Fine. He's got that's not my problem. That's
Yeah.
if someone else has.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the third thing she asks is what can you do about it? If you mistrust somebody, what can
Speak
you
to
do?
them.
I would think.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's discussing with them.
Just
But I think, like, if you are a staff member and if you mistrust a member of council, I think that's a very difficult thing because the lines of communications aren't exactly like, hi, Ken, I don't trust ya, as far as I could throw ya.
That's more difficult.
That's a difficult one, right? Because then you're also relying for it to go through your CAO and then and how many people are willing to actually do that, right? Like, that's a pretty big thing if you're going out of your way to say, I mistrust and I have a problem.
I think it would be very difficult for a staff member to do.
Yes.
To a counselor,
I think so too.
yeah.
just because their fear of never, yeah.
It's amazing you guys use that word because I don't see it that like I don't think of it that way. That
Because it shouldn't be that way, right?
yeah,
But
because what reprisal could I have? Over,
perception, how other,
yeah, your level since
Yeah.
I'm only responsible for Karen.
I know, but you could go to Karen
exactly.
on that staff member.
Wow, yeah, it's just amazing. I mean, this is so foreign to my.
And sometimes it's not even like the actual, like, how can you be like, like, how can you be punished in terms of losing your job? Sometimes it's, you know, you're gonna tell the CAO is gonna tell department head might tell your manager. Now already like 5 people know, and maybe they might tell somebody, and then now everybody else.
I guess you're providing
Well, and I
that
think
now, so how do you get it?
Staff would,
Saving face,
Saving
if
face.
they lost the
make informed decisions versus,
council,
you know,
Mm-hmm.
I guess that'd be
Makes it
almost
harder to deal with.
emotional or
Rationalizing.
you don't have the support from a counselor.
logical.
No, like if you told a resident something and you believe a counselor is
You would
not,
expect the counselor to back you
to
up,
relay your technical
or at least if
information.
you
Yeah.
thought
True enough.
Yeah.
you'd handle your situation
Yeah.
with the public different.
Yeah.
It's hard enough.
I think that can go both ways as well.
It can go both ways. I was just
Staff
gonna
staff
say,
doesn't have the trust of a counselor,
Yes,
right?
yeah, that's what I meant.
I think that for council though, like it is a little bit different because you do have a CAO, so you take it to them and then you let them deal with that, right? Whereas for a staff member to go up the chain is, certainly here it's a little different, but like in a bigger place, like you're looking at several chains of command until you get to
Yeah.
a position where you're discussing with the counselor. Like obviously, I think the answer is what can you do is have a like communication, but I think in reality it's like a lot more difficult than.
Well, person to person, counselor to counselor, it has to be.
Could be made on.
If I had an issue,
Yes.
I'd talk to the person.
Yes.
Yeah, and the sooner the better. Don't let it fester.
Yeah.
But would
Yeah.
you, like in that state, would you say, look for clarification that
That's what they intended.
that's what's agreed upon, right? Because maybe, you know what, maybe I don't trust this fellow this much on this side.
Yeah.
He's in agreement with it.
But maybe it's a misunderstanding on my part. Like, that's
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
want to confirm, because
Yeah.
it's easy in a political sense to all of a sudden paint somebody, you don't
Yeah,
trust them.
yeah.
But it could just be, that's why I have to talk about it. I'm trying to think, there was one example I had where I didn't trust somebody, and I was saying something, and that person came to me and said, listen, I think we need to, if you have a problem, if you could come and talk to me
You need to
directly,
tell me. Yeah. Okay.
and we'll deal with it. And that was a growing up moment, but that was,
That's tough.
it was a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah. It's tough to approach anybody. I
know.
think, and it's tough to be approached, to receive that and to say like, I have to do something about this. Yeah,
Back off.
So have I
Usually
ever,
it's the best thing to do because
It is.
it'll probably end or get better.
Yeah.
If you don't say anything,
Yeah.
it'll only get worse.
Yeah.
And it goes on.
yeah,
Every issue.
yes.
that's why I never would say you caved,
No, but in my mind, I did.
not mine.
In my technical skills, yeah.
It's okay.
I'll give you another 30 seconds and then we'll chat.
We'll jump again.
No, it's okay. You don't have enough time.
Speaking of technical, what's going on with the heat in this room, Don?
I don't know.
It's like down to the minimum. and
Well,
it's
you
like-
made me close the door.
Sorry, it was stinking, but like it's.
I'd
like,
rather smell the
really-
diesel fuel than have this heat.
I like to hear them doing their nails back there.
They're doing some big jobs back there.
Yeah.
Oof.
Working on the plows?
Oh, graders, changing seals on cylinders.
Really?
It's massive.
Okay, you've gotten quiet, so let's chat about them. So let's start with the one about group dynamics. That was your group over here, right? Okay, so what did you come up with?
We had for what it looks like, we went back and talked about the passive group or the high conflict group and having a council that could possibly be divided or votes, like you said, the same way each time. So that could be an example of what a group dynamic could look like. And we talked about how something like that could be resolved. And training was a big one, so for council, and that could either come from staff with expertise or bringing in outside people. Talked about compromise, so if it's the same people always with the same issue, then someone would have to compromise. We also talked about getting direction from the CAO if that person is going to be kind of leading council meetings or not necessarily council meetings, but giving more direction if there's a really conflicted group or a group that's too passive. And then we had, for impact, it could be that there's no decisions made. It could be inefficiencies or productivity that are affected on a council level as well as a staff level. We had that it could be unhappy council, unhappy staff, unhappy residents. It could lead to any of those. You could also create extra work for staff if things are being passed back, like you said, if they can't come to an agreement or if it's a high conflict issue. And we also talked about that it could cause turnover with staff or council.
Yes, so those things that can all happen. There's another concept called groupthink. Have you heard of the term groupthink?
Yeah.
Yeah, And so groupthink is kind of like you stop saying something because you don't want to stand out from the group, so everybody else is agreeing with something, and you won't say, oh, well, I don't agree with that, because you get kind of locked into this almost passive position where you don't want to speak up. And so that's something to be mindful of from a self-awareness standpoint. Why am I taking the position I'm taking? Am I taking the position I'm taking because I'm part of a little divided camp? Am I taking the position I am because everybody else is and I just want to go along with it? So asking yourself, am I really making a decision or voting on an issue based on my assessment of the issues and the issues alone? Or are there extraneous things that are influencing me in a way that I shouldn't allow to be influencing me? Okay, that's good. So we'll give them candy.
No,
Take it back. We didn't earn it this time. We've certainly earned the loss.
Okay, so there's group. You had face saving. So why don't you explain what face saving means in this context?
Lauren was kind enough to get us started on the face saving. So the example that Lauren gave us was that you came to council to change one thing, and now it's not so easy to make that change, and how do you deal with that? We talked about in trying to save face, there can be, depending on how it's dealt with, there can be the loss of self-esteem for that particular council member. The credibility of that council member can be affected. Decisions can be made not taking into consideration all of the information that is available, because you already have that decision made in your mind before you consider all the factors. There's also the component of it that you don't want to disappoint those who you've indicated these are the types of changes that you want to make when you come on to a new council. And then when you're faced with additional information, or if you take into consideration that additional information, your viewpoint may change. And it can also cause irrational decision making because it's not well informed. We actually talked about, Jessica brought up the point that was touched on by the other group, is that when you talked about that group thinking, that maybe you're not even comfortable sharing the information that you have, because you don't want to stand out or take a differing viewpoint from what's already been expressed. And then that results in not all the information necessarily being considered when council makes a decision. So some of the things that we thought in terms to get around that is you have to own the decision. So whether or not it was what you thought before you came, I guess, to the table, if you, after you consider everything and a decision has been made by council, that you own that decision and you support that decision. You're making the decision, when you're considering making a decision, you got to remember that you're making it for the greater good. And it's important that you make decisions based on all the information, and it's rationalized. And those were the comments that
Courage probably comes in there too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because face saving is about feeling vulnerable and feeling that people are going to look upon you badly. And so sometimes you have to have the courage to say, that's actually what I thought, and I believed it coming in, and now I have different information than I didn't have before. Now when you see federal and provincial governments, they just come in and say the other government hid all this information and we're actually in further debt than we said we were, and we're going to have a little study on that. But we can say, I have more information now that I didn't have before. The other thing you can do to support each other is to help each other when you see maybe somebody is struggling with that, is to say, obviously, there's more information now for all of us, so that you can support each other, so that somebody doesn't have to feel alone. Like, you can all acknowledge that maybe there's information that wasn't available to you before, or that you hadn't thought about in a certain way. And that's the importance. That's why we have more than one person making a decision, right? That's why we have councils, so that you've got a variety of people looking at these important issues and thinking about them from different perspectives, so that collectively you can come to the right conclusion. So you can support each other by showing that there's other information that maybe wasn't available to that person initially. So you can help each other with that.
Okay.
All right, candy bags, moving along. Okay, our last group, mistrust. So what does that look like? And the impact, what do you do?
Do you guys want to take it away?
I don't know, I thought we failed on this one.
Well, we just talked about mistrust from different angles, like mistrust from council members having mistrust from staff, whether it's because giving incorrect information or not providing them with the most up-to-date information, all of that. We talked about mistrust between members of council if they're trying to make a decision and they believe people have alternative motives, or if they're making decisions from an incorrect standpoint. And then we talked about mistrust between staff and council. Like staff can feel mistrust if they're not respected, if their decision-making is not respected, if their knowledge is not respected, if them as a person is not respected. And I think obviously the impact is difficulties in how you work with the person, difficulties in council meetings, and how that comes out in the public when you're mistrusting each other and the information that's being discussed. I think in terms of what you can do, ultimately, like we just said, obviously communication is really important. It's important to whether it's council to councilor or so on to mention or let the person know that you believe there's a perceived mistrust, and perhaps it's not. Maybe it's just a lack of understanding. But where we all sort of agreed is that it's a lot more difficult for a staff member to address the issue if they believe there's a mistrust from a council member, because it's sometimes in bigger places the chain of command is so high too.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's fear of reprisal for so many staff members that they don't actually approach somebody and say, we need to talk about the fact that I feel I'm being really whatever by this counselor and so on. Whereas I think for council, they know the avenue is to go to the CAO, and then that will then take care of itself in the proper administrative sense. And I think that's it.
I think one of the other manifestations of mistrust that I see in a council setting, which I'm hoping is not here, but is where somebody is leaking information from closed sessions. It is very difficult to work together as a council when you've got somebody that's leaking information. And I have had to come in and give legal advice to councils, knowing that somebody sitting in front of me is going to take what I say and leave with that information and release it. And that's very troubling. It's very disconcerting. So being very mindful of maintaining integrity, because you impact not just that one decision or that one thing, you impact that trust. And we all know that once trust is violated, it's very difficult to reinstate trust, right? So we have to be very careful that we're always engaging in behavior that shows the utmost integrity and trust, so that we don't end up with a barrier that can be insurmountable when we stop trusting each other. And sometimes mistrust comes from assuming that the other person is doing or thinking in a certain way without actually asking them, what did you mean by that? So we jump to conclusions. So sometimes we can avoid mistrust by actually clearing the air and saying, I want to understand what you meant by that thing. Okay, we're going to take a little break until 2:45, and then we'll come back and we're going to talk about psychological things that can create challenges.
It's like a lunch break.
Longer than lunch break.
Yeah.
talk about minimizing unproductive conflict. And this quote is, you can't change how other people act in a conflict, and often you can't change your situation. But you can change what you do. Let's talk about what we do. And let's start with our assumptions because they're usually wrong. What is she thinking?
Why'd you cut me off?
Yes. Is she thinking any swear words in there too,
Maybe.
maybe? Might also be thinking, why am I driving on the wrong side of the road? But,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but we're not often in those situations thinking, oh, that person must be so busy. I bet there's something really important they have to do. They probably didn't see me. It's okay, go ahead. Right? We go straight to, you're a jerk. And that's our common kind of defense mechanism. And we call it fundamental attribution error. And what it means is that we attribute internal motives, usually hostile motives, to other people's behavior, but we tend to see our behavior as benign. An example I sometimes give, I was at Sunset Grill a few years ago with a friend of mine, and we were talking about attribution error over breakfast. This is how much fun it is to hang out with me, because go for breakfast, you're going to talk about attribution error. But we're talking about it, and we went to go up and pay, and it was a Sunday, and it was very busy, and there were a lot of people waiting either to pay or to get a table. And somebody went in front of us and paid ahead of us, even though we were in line. And my friend says in this passive-aggressive way, oh, it must be so nice to think you're so important to go first, right, or something stupid like that. And I said, well, first of all, it's passive-aggressive. But secondly, we just talked about this. You've decided that this person has looked at us and had this conscious thought, aha, I'm going to butt in front of them. I'm more important. What's a more likely thing that happened with that person? They didn't see us. They thought we were waiting for a table. You know, they just assumed we'd already paid, but they're likely not thinking, aha, I have you now. But we do that all the time with other people's behavior, and that's one of those things that leads to mistrust, is where we assume motives for other people's behavior that aren't actually true. And the other thing that attaches onto that is confirmation bias. And confirmation bias says we look for things to support what we already believe to be true. Well, that person always does this. They always think they're so important. They always do whatever. And then whenever we interact with them, we're looking for evidence that supports that. And when you look for evidence of something, you can usually find it. And it's the kind of thing that happens in, for example, policing. They decide on a suspect. This is the person who did the bad thing. And then when they receive evidence that supports that, it's like, see, that proves that. And when there's evidence that refutes it and says maybe there's a different suspect, they might not even think about it. They may dismiss it, they may minimize it, and it's not a conscious thing. We don't set out to engage in confirmation bias. It's a subconscious process. And so again, it can affect how we interact with each other. And so one of the things that we use as a mantra in our office is simply this, which is assume the best. Is there another possible explanation for why somebody is engaging the way they are? Hey, let's look at face saving as one of them. Somebody might be having to take a particular position at a council meeting, not because that's truly the way they believe, but they ran on a campaign of that, or they have constituents getting upset with them. So thinking, what's another possible way of interpreting their behavior? And remembering that the other person may be just as right as you are. So it's that lens there. That's why I have the 3D glasses. But we all look through different lenses when we see the world. And that is something we really have to bear in mind. The other thing to do, because I showed you that little quote, but thinking about your own behavior, that is to at all times be conscious of your own reactions. So in a normal council meeting, you're probably fine. But when things start to become contentious, that's when other things start to come to play. That's when things like needing to save face or mistrust or grandstanding for our constituents start to happen. So we have to be mindful of our own behavior. So are you causing the conflict to escalate? Are you engaging in any behavior, making snide comments or rolling your eyes or, slamming your paper down? Are you doing things that are going to escalate things? Or are you calming it down? Are you avoiding a discussion? It's just like what I talked about, punting stuff back to staff to say, well, we're going to have staff take another look at it instead of actually dealing with it. And are you creating a division instead of a connection? So what we can do is avoid getting defensive when somebody says they disagree with us. It doesn't need to be seen as a personal attack. Of course, you're going to have different viewpoints on things. And not becoming positional. So I'm taking a position just because I want to take that position, rather than I'm taking that position based on these rational reasons which make sense to me. Have any of you heard of the Harvard Negotiating Project? You heard of it? Have you heard of the book Getting to Yes? It's part of the Harvard Negotiating Project. So it was written by two people from Harvard, and it talks about when you are negotiating, when you're trying to come to a consensus or conclusion on something, instead of becoming positional, entrenched in, I want this and you want that, and one of us has to win, you think, is there a third alternative, or some combination of what we're looking for that can achieve as many of our respective goals as possible? So they talk about it literally as a pie. Let's expand the pie. Instead of having the pie be a small thing, where we're each trying to get our piece out of it, let's enlarge the pie so we each have an opportunity to get something from it. So it's thinking creatively instead of positionally. And that can be really tough to do when you're in the middle of a contentious discussion about an issue that you have to resolve as part of the township. But how can we take a breather, take a step back, and think, are there other possible ways to address this? And now I want to talk about respectful engagement. I'm going to skip ahead a couple of slides, and then I'm going to come back. I want to talk about something first. Okay, so over the course of 2017, 2018, I did a series of presentations with somebody who used to be the director of HR for the city of Burlington, Roy Mail, to OMAA, which is the Municipal Administrators Association, so CAOs, city managers. And we did a little bit of a survey, and I've brought like 3 of the survey results with you, but it was a longer survey. And we asked people, first of all, CAOs, city managers, have you personally been harassed or maligned by a member of council? 76% of the people in those sessions said they had. 76% of CAOs and city managers have been harassed by a member of council. That's a pretty significant number. And if you expand that into how many of your municipalities have had other members of staff be harassed, that number would likely be just as high, if not higher. Then we asked, were you pressured to ignore the issue or downplay it? And a large percentage, 45%, said they were pressured. And then when we asked if the issue ultimately was successfully resolved, only 24% said it was. So this is a big problem. It's an issue that is happening across the province. And so one of the things that we have to do is think about what harassment looks like and what people's rights are in Ontario. And some of you have already had the respect training, so these pieces will be familiar to you. But harassment falls under 2 pieces of legislation for our purposes right now, the Human Rights Code and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And the Human Rights Code says that people have the right to be free from a course of vexatious comment or conduct against a worker in a workplace that is known or ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome. And I have here as the second square on my flowchart related to a protected ground. So the protected grounds under the Human Rights Code are the things that people, that the government has identified as being worthy of protection because people have historically been discriminated on. So there's 16 of them. I'm not going to cite all of them, but sexual harassment, racial harassment, harassment based on gender identity and expression, harassment based on sexual orientation. Those are the ones we see quite often when it comes to claims of harassment. We also see a lot of claims around disability, but not as much harassment as a failure to accommodate. So the Human Rights Code says that employees have the right to be free from discriminatory forms of harassment, including from members of council, including from members of the public. There is this notion sometimes that staff needs to put up with it. You have to have a thick skin, and that's part of the job. And that's the language we hear. That's the stuff we see put out there on social media. And that's not true. The courts don't say, and the tribunals don't say, oh, well, you work in municipal government, you're just going to have to put up with it. It's part of the job. That's not how it works. Now, for a long time, we only had the Human Rights Code in terms of protecting people from harassment. And a lot of times people were being harassed for reasons that had nothing to do with race or sex or anything like that. It was just plain bullying. And there was nothing in the law that would protect it. But then we had Bill 168. Have any of you heard of Bill 168? Yes, heard of Bill 168, right? It's funny because once a bill changes legislation, the bill goes away. But since 2010, we've been talking about Bill 168. So we'll talk about Bill 168. But what Bill 168 did was it amended the Occupational Health and Safety Act to say that individuals have the right to be free from any kind of harassment. So it can be sexual harassment, it can be bullying. So bullying is just harassment that isn't necessarily because of my anything, my gender, my whatever it is. And again, that harassment is around coming from any source, including from councils. And so employees can file complaints if they feel they are being harassed by a member of council. And you have to be very mindful of the power imbalance. So you may not feel powerful. You may not be trying to exert power in a demeaning way, but everything you say feels different when you are an elected official to someone who is a staff member because of the vulnerabilities that we talked about already. So you have to be very careful about how things are received. And so there are a couple of avenues where somebody can go if they're feeling harassed. And one is the internal policy on respect in the workplace, and the other might be a code of conduct. And the two are not mutually exclusive. So you could have, for example, somebody that complained, so the Sarnia situation is an example. So Mike Bradley was the mayor of Sarnia, he still is the mayor of Sarnia, and he had two people complain under the code of conduct, under the municipal code of conduct, about his behavior. And that went to the Integrity Commissioner, Bob Swayze, and Bob Swayze investigated from a code of conduct standpoint. There were also two of those people plus two other people filed an internal harassment complaint under the workplace policies. And that was investigated from an external investigation standpoint, and that was the piece that I did. So you can have kind of two tandem processes happening, and sometimes elected officials get upset. Well, why is that happening? How could we have these two things? Well, our law is a little bit in limbo right now. There's not a lot of clarity around it, but they're two separate things. They can operate exclusively or in tandem. But either way, you have an obligation, right? Either way, you have an obligation to treat people respectfully and fairly and mindfully.
Question for you.
Yes.
The incident, was it one incident?
No.
4 people were involved?
No, it was similar behavior towards 4 different people. Effectively, they're the most senior staff. It was 4 women. I don't think it was gender related, but it was 4 women in senior roles, and he just targeted them for poor treatment over a period of time. And the thing with harassment is that sometimes there's big things that happen in a single incident, and we go, yeah, okay, I get it. But sometimes it's the little things that happen repeatedly over and over and over again. And that can have a devastating impact as well. The problem is it doesn't translate well onto paper. So if somebody came to you and said, you know, I got kicked by the mayor yesterday, people are going to be, wow, you got kicked by the mayor yesterday. But if somebody says, you know, the mayor comes in, he walks in the door, he never says hello or good morning to everybody, or he says hello and good morning rather to everybody except me. Every day, I'm the one that gets ignored. You know, makes snide comments or rolls his eyes when I'm speaking. I'll give you candy because I've picked on you. But that sort of thing where you think, well, why does it matter? But it does matter. People are human, and we crave that connection and interaction, and if we feel isolated or degraded in some way, it's going to have an impact. And the analogy I've used, which some of you have heard before, is the feather analogy. So if somebody came into work one day and put a feather on top of you, unless you're allergic to feathers, no big deal. You're going to manage having this walking around with this feather on you. But every day, somebody puts a feather on you. Every day, every day, every day. And soon those feathers weigh a ton. Well, a ton of feathers weighs the same as a ton of rocks. It just takes longer to get there. And that's what it's like with little microaggressions in the workplace, little snide comments. Staff is making a presentation before council, and you're kind of shuffling your papers, rolling your eyes, or sighing like, hurry up already. And you may not think that that's a big deal. But to the person who's making that presentation, maybe once they can handle it, but if it happens every time, it wears people down. has a really big impact. So we're going to do a little case study now, and this is an amalgamation of all of the bad behavior I have seen in the last few years. So I think that one's here. Not here, don't worry, I didn't, but I don't want you to think, oh, is this here? No, it's a bunch of people. So back to our groups of 3. I want you to figure out what went wrong there and what needs to be done to fix it, okay? So you're figuring out what went wrong and how to fix it.
Persistent, and I move very slowly.
Okay.
Now what are we doing?
You're doing a case study on a bad
I like the names.
but not
Do you want me to act out the bad
Don, you want to
counsel?
read it?
Sure, you can role play.
Okay, Councillor Seymour has been on council with the City of Atlantis for 2 terms. Although he didn't always have political aspirations, he ran for council because he didn't like the way the city was being managed. In particular, he was upset with the development of the city's Lovers Park, running Brook Park.
Oh, Jesus, it's close to home.
And wanted to make a difference on how it was transformed. He is a vocal advocate for the development issues associated with the park and has a loyal group of supporters. Councillor Seymour makes it a habit to email and phone senior staff members during the weekends before committee week to either get answers to his questions or to challenge the content of the report. If the senior staff person is not home, he leaves an aggressive, demanding voicemail message. Councillor Seymour is very outspoken at council meetings, goes to great effort to show that he has the backs of the constituents he represents, especially those who are also strong advocates of the park.
Blow hard.
Sometimes his comments veer into personal attacks against fellow councillors. This has led to some very difficult council meetings. He also believes it is important to call his staff he believes are making poor decisions about the park as well as other matters. He does so during council meetings, on his blog, and Facebook pages. Councillor Seymour has a close relationship with a member of the local media, and it appears he may be providing her with information about city matters so that the truth can be heard. Other councillors have been frustrated with Seymour's approach, and there is much tension during council meetings. The city planner also complained that council comments negative about her reports are unfair, untrue, and she feels harassed. Councillor Seymour in turn claims that he is being, council is being silenced.
You and I just talked about it.
Another staff member confided to the CAO if he feels bullied by Councillor Seymour. She wants something done, but doesn't want to make a formal complaint, as she feels retaliation, particularly since Councillor Seymour is very popular with the public. How should this matter be addressed?
This matters.
Okay.
So I guess other members of council taking something more up behind the woodshed isn't on the list there?
No, I don't think that's.
Well, you know, he's.
What do you think?
Yeah. But he would provide the information.
I think we call her the election.
Senior staff.
So I think let's take you one thing at a time, okay? So the first thing is he emails and phones during the weekends, right? So if they're not home, he leaves aggressive and demanding voicemail messages. How should that be addressed?
That should be addressed by the CEO.
That's a CEO thing, and I mean,
It's not-
obviously,
It's not appropriate to do that.
and there's typically sometimes policies in terms of like responses, right? Like staff aren't required to respond to emails right away, whether it's council or members of the public, right? Like some municipalities say 24 hours, 48 hours, or whatever, and like weekends are usually off
Yeah.
limits, right? So I think it's important for municipalities to maybe come up with a policy in terms of responding to emails, like a corporate policy, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think I would prioritize this as first we protect the staff from Councillor Seymour.
Yes, oh yeah,
The
100%.
CAO, like I'm on with you all the way.
He needs to be told it's not appropriate.
Yeah, and it's,
Can't happen.
So I think that it's
the
important to
mayor.
tell him, but then after that, you need something, you need to have a
Yeah.
policy, because that way, when he violates it, then you go to integrity commission, so I think that's good.
if we don't distinguish the behavior, that's what I'm just saying.
Yeah.
We have to.
You have to
protect the
address it
CAO,
first.
Protect the staff,
Yeah.
and then go to policy.
Council Seymour's outspoken and goes effort to show that he has the backs of constituents. Sometimes his comments veer into personal attacks. This has led to some difficult council meetings. He also believes it's important to call out staff he believes are making poor decisions about the park and the matter. He does that during council meetings. So what do we do? How should this be addressed?
Well, I think the mayor needs to address that. Part of the other chair of the meeting. But we need training. We need proactive training for, like we're.
And also probably a refresher on the code of
I think
conduct.
that's good. Yeah, I think the mayor needs to, like, have,
Show leadership.
yes, like, it needs to be respectful, all knowledge. It cannot be, anytime it even veers on personal, needs to be addressed, like, immediately, with the respect and the agreement of the rest of council, right?
Going forward. 'cause
And
what you're
then,
gonna
you're
say
right,
is
training
this
would
is
probably be
just-
good.
Going forward from here.
And then,
if this
again,
behavior
policy on
continues,
respect in the
we're gonna apply
workplace and respecting staff for
when councilors will stand up.
that. And then the media part is a close relationship with a member of the local media.
That's,
You know, so
we
I
can do
think
it.
that would be one step as a meeting.
Unless you make it confidential.
He's got to accept the rule of council, but,
Yeah, what can we do about that?
Then there's also
how do you
part with
convey
the
that
staff
to
person
her?
too, right? I think that's where you're getting to the.
I'm not sure.
What
I
can
think
you
it's the same
do?
thing as before, sensitivity.
Yeah, but he's.
You can
he's-
appoint as a corporation one person to be the spokesman to the
Well,
media.
that's usually it's
The chair.
Yeah, it's the executive director or CAO,
Yes.
CEO,
Yeah.
or the mayor. Those are the two that speak on behalf of.
Yeah.
But
Close relationship
that's,
with a member of the local media.
we can't address his relationship.
Violation of code of conduct.
No,
You can say.
He can-
but then if we get indication that none of the represented people said that to the media and they're quoting or they're saying, then you have grounds for
The way I read it is.
An investigation.
City matters.
Then there's a policy on who speaks on behalf of
Right?
the municipality.
Because he's complaining about particular individuals or
That's a fault of
it's not
This is
a decision or something that happens about a specific report done by a specific person, specific staff, right?
Yeah.
So to me, that's either,
That's harassment.
that's harassment or disrespect or code of conduct or.
So where are you now? You're in the next one where they become frustrated. The city planner has complained that Councillor Seymour's comments to the media about her reports are unfair and untrue and she feels harassed. And he's being harassed by council is being silenced. I feel like, I mean, what do you do now? I feel like she should make a complaint, no? Like if you feel
Well,
like
it
you're
says
being.
that she has.
Oh, does she?
complained. She has complained.
She's complained, but council has acted on that complaint of the CEO. An investigation should be done.
Doesn't
It
matter how.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, right?
certainly crosses the bound.
No, she's saying another staff member wants something done but doesn't want to make a formal complaint as she feels retaliation.
Yeah, another.
It was anonymous,
Another.
and it's, I was.
Particularly since he's very popular.
Explain the process
Yeah, and there's
for
no.
I'll
harassment.
tell you guys, we had in Milton when I was there, we had a counselor who
So
was there for a while.
third party.
And
Third party put in an anonymous.
finally took
complaint.
one person to make a claim against him and they did an investigation and like literally, I don't even know how many more people came forward
They're talking, I think, you just mentioned, if you hear about it.
After the fact.
after the fact. And it was amazing what the investigation, like council released privilege and they released it to the public and it was like amazing, like people were saying, I've experienced this for years. Entire departments would be like, okay, he's coming, oh, he's talking to that one girl, everyone go protect her. Like the women got together and made like their own little,
Should be aware of it. It's too informal.
This is wrong.
yeah, but you know what?
He doesn't.
Because you look around and everyone knew it. Everyone knew it. Everyone knew that he was like
How does
that.
guy even get, I mean, just,
So it's like, what do you do, right? Like everyone knows about it, no one's saying anything, so then people just assume it's normal behavior, so then you make your own internal ways to
I
protect
feel sorry
yourself.
for, I feel sorry for staff who put that, I just feel that guy's a creep.
Yeah, but I think it happens way more than we think. Because I can think of several other
yeah.
examples where I know for a fact people that were acting completely, and still are, and everyone just sort
The
of
world we live in.
doesn't, you know?
Like even that last one here,
Yes.
she confides to the CAO.
Yeah,
So,
that's,
The CAO now,
needs to
Well, if someone feels harassed,
Right away.
it's no different than the situation we went through.
yeah, well, I think certainly.
But if she doesn't, if she's only feeling.
As soon as they know,
Almost to the.
whether officially or otherwise, if they're aware,
If you're aware, then
that's
yeah.
the test.
Whether they
Well, I
make
think regardless if it's you, if you're a supervisor and if you feel any of your people, you have a responsibility to act on it immediately.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with that 100%.
yeah. So,
But in the case of the CEO, like some of it may be like a conversation with the person at first, right? Letting them know, because that counselor that had the investigation against him in my municipality, he was blindsided. He just thought he was being really nice. He just thought he was like being a buddy with all of our female staff members, and that's just what was normal conversation. Like, had anyone really gone up to him and said, like, all the women in this place feel uncomfortable, right? Like, they're coming up with, yes. Yes, so like, I think there's two ways, right? Like, I feel like there's a duty, or at least someone to like approach the person at first and say, are you intending to do this?
Yes,
Because
to
this,
be corrected.
because there is, are there any situations where you feel like you're doing this to person because somebody has mentioned that they feel this way, right?
Uncomfortable.
And you don't throw the person, you don't mention their name maybe right away, but I feel like it warrants a conversation first, but certainly if that gets nowhere, then yeah.
Were you here when Junie was here?
No, I wasn't. Why?
Well, I stepped in while ago.
What did you do?
Yeah, he didn't hurt his wife, but, beautiful day there. And I said to Junie, I bet you wish you were outside today working on your tan, it's so nice.
Yeah. And she didn't appreciate it.
No, she's in the wrong, she was in.
No, the counselor.
There had been some counselors.
so she
No, she didn't. Everybody laughed because they realized I didn't know.
Oh, I see, I see.
Right? But I thought, somebody they came up and told me afterwards, did you know she's, I said, no.
Now I know.
Everybody understood
Okay,
it.
so let's talk
Yes.
about
But it could
this
easily, that's
one.
to your
Could have been
point.
easily, exactly.
What things in particular jumped out at you as being not so great? Counselor Seymour.
All of it, yeah.
All of the above. So what were some things that jumped out at you when you went,
Debating on social media.
Yes, and that's a big one. And it's not even just, challenge vis-a-vis staff, but sometimes people are using social media as a platform to say, I'm better than you, I didn't agree with this decision and I voted against it, and a little bit of grandstanding instead of respecting the democratic process. You had your say in council, it was voted on, and maybe you lost in that vote, but they're using social media as a way to continue the conversation to make themselves look like the champion for the constituents. So that can be a challenge. So social media was definitely a problem there. What else was he doing? Crossing some lines.
It looks like he was breaching some confidential information to the press.
Yes. Yep. So there was a confidentiality leak. What else was there?
Were those accusations, or was there proof of that? Though,
But him leaking?
yeah,
Sometimes you know without being able to prove it, right?
just thinking,
Yeah.
being devil's advocate, I mean, he's garnished himself a rather bad reputation, and all of a sudden you can point the finger pretty quick at him being a leak. Might not be
Yeah,
him.
might be somebody else because they know he's going to get the blame
Yeah.
doing it. Absolutely. Nobody says I'm over here yet.
Pressure on the city planner.
Yes. Yeah.
Instead of making their decision based on their sort of role, being pressured to change that.
Yep.
And following the chain of command.
Yes, not following the chain of command. And contacting people at home on weekends, making demands, that's not respecting people's personal time, but going directly to staff. Again, we talked about that chain of command was also an issue. Was there anything else in there that, Mary?
There were lots of informal complaints, but I think there needs to be a formal complaint process as part of the workplace harassment and violence policy.
Okay,
So
so in
that-
terms of remedying it, you think one of them would be a complaint?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think complaints stop people like that?
I think it's a good first step.
It's a good first step, but it's a necessary first step. And by the way, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, they made an amendment to the legislation a couple of years ago now that said employers have a duty to investigate. So where the township is aware that somebody is being harassed, even if they don't file a formal complaint, there is a duty to investigate. So you may see things on social media and decide we have a duty to protect that person. Yes.
Just want to speak to that. I spoke to Karen at my place of employment. I was involved in a harassment complaint. I was the person that was harassed, and somebody else put in an anonymous complaint to the city, and they had an obligation to investigate. I didn't, so there was 4 of us, but none of the 4 that were harassed complained, and somebody just sent an anonymous letter to the city, and it triggered a full investigation. My position was, I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to, I had to. They sat me down, I had to participate. So, just to let you know that it could be overheard, it could be somebody else and anonymous, and it'll trigger an investigation.
Yeah, so I think the duty to investigate would be triggered in this situation, because kind of everybody knows this is going on. So that can trigger certain things. We're going to talk about those the remedies that can happen after investigation. But what else can be done here?
Training.
Training, yeah?
Well, and Nina, you had a good point about this too.
Which one?
Well,
I don't know,
not
I
being
talked a lot.
blindsided.
Yeah, I talked a lot.
Yeah.
Sorry, which one?
About talking to the person first. They may not even be aware
Yeah.
of what they're doing is causing,
No.
Yes.
right?
Yes, sometimes people think that's the way I'm supposed to act, and I have heard counselors say, well, that's what I feel my role is. I'm here to be an agitator. I'm not here to go along with the status quo. I'm here to make change. That's what I campaigned on, that's what I believe, and they may not realize that there's a more effective way to do it that doesn't cause harm.
We as a group kind of addressed each paragraph as an incident. So to address the first one about calling it home, then our direction to that counselor would be that everything had to go through the CAO.
Yeah.
So now you're getting, if you want the proper information, then it has to go through the CAO, and that alleviates that. Now, I mean, the harassment might fall on the CAO, but, so we had kind of steps for each one and kind of progress towards rectifying the behavior incrementally versus,
Yeah.
you know, that was kind of our school of thought.
Okay, that's a good idea. What else can happen?
We weren't sure about the giving information to the media, if it was like closed session confidential meetings that he was leaking, but we said that maybe the integrity commissioner should be contacted.
Yeah, I think if you've got leaks, the integrity commissioner may need to get involved. Sometimes it's hard to prove, but sometimes it can be proven where that's coming from. What can council as a whole do when you've got a bad actor?
Build a woodshed, take them out behind it.
It's not appropriate.
That might not be the right answer. I
Am I the
have
wrong
to think a
question?
little bit, but I'm not sure that's the right answer. Okay, so plan B.
So I think there was a failure of leadership here, especially in the council. The role as a mayor is to keep everything civilized, and we spoke of training, and we thought possibly a meeting between the mayor, the CAO, and the individual, and then you could inform them going forward, this is how, you know, appropriate behavior is going to be rewarded, and if it's inappropriate, these are the steps. And it's just relating back to training, but I think at this stage it's gotten away from them. You'd wanna prevent that, but you know, complying to the Roberts rules, and just said training, educate, and just let the individual know that you know, we're not gonna accept that behavior going
You
forward.
have more power than the law has, right? If on a daily basis to address these things, to call people on, to say this is not our values, this doesn't represent the township well, this is not how we will treat each other, calling people out on it and dealing with it as it happens instead of waiting until it gets to be a bigger issue. Are we able to close that? Yeah. Thanks. I know it's gonna get hotter. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Take the log off the fire.
Yeah.
I heard you were in
Good.
control.
It's on air conditioning.
It's on air conditioning?
It's not working.
Not in the budget.
Yeah, that was cut.
Was there anything else that you thought of that could happen there? I do like the idea of the mayor meeting with the councillor.
I think you can establish like a policy on who speaks to council, who speaks to the media on behalf of the municipality. That way you establish that only one person can communicate
Yes.
the decision-making in council.
But having those conversations is important. Now, sometimes you get a councillor Seymour who doesn't care, right? So conversations aren't going to change things. I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I'm here to do what I set out to do, which is, again, that to be an agitator. So it can be a little harder to deal with a person that isn't just not realizing the impact of their behavior, but deliberately doesn't care. But that's where you have to kind of step it up in terms of enforcing collectively what you believe to be important. And so we pinpointed some of the things in that example of things that we see, but the things I hear about all the time are things like micromanaging and constantly badgering staff with information, social media postings and media commentary. You see people that run on a platform of, I'm going to make sure that CAO loses their job, or the chief building official, or whatever it is. It's, you know, that my first order of business when I get in there is to turf that person. Leaking confidential information or defaming people or harassing people. So those are the things that we see a lot of. Now, there are a lot of consequences to that. You're not effective as a council as a whole when you have somebody that's engaging in that behavior. It becomes a distraction. But even that person can become lame duck, right? You're one vote. And so if you start to become a problem, if you become that issue, then people may just start not voting for the things that are important to you, and so you lose that ability. And then staff becomes reluctant. So you don't get the bold ideas, the strong recommendations. You get people fearful of what the outcome is going to be, of how they're going to be disrespected and maligned, and so they don't give the opinions that you actually need in order to make the decisions. And challenges with staff recruitment and retention. So in a 4-week span after the election, Sarnia lost their CAO, their chief building official, their city solicitor, and their finance director. And that was after some other defections, after the thing happened with the mayor. So so right now, they're kind of running without some pretty key staff members. So these things, do have an impact. And then it costs money to deal with these things, to hire investigators. There's a PR issue. And so you're spending all your time and energy dealing with behavior instead of dealing with the issues that are important to the township. So it is important to kind of look at those things and deal with people. So I mentioned before that there can be 2 avenues, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can't have either the integrity commissioner or an external investigator dealing with these complaints. Remedies when it's a complaint that is investigated via the integrity commissioner are set out under the Municipal Act. And the Municipal Act gives 2 options. One is a reprimanding counsel for somebody who's found to have violated the code of conduct, and the other suspending pay for up to 90 days. And that's it for the remedies. In Whitchurch-Stouffville, the mayor there, he had this wall in his office. I don't know if any of you followed this story, but he had this wall in his office that they called the CSI wall with people's pictures and arrows and things written all over there, which was a little frightening for people. And they did an investigation and they found that he violated the code of conduct. And I can't remember all the remedies that they made, but some of them were like he couldn't be on certain committees and he couldn't be in City Hall unless he was accompanied by people, and it was for city business. And so there were some restrictions put into place. And he challenged that. He filed an application for judicial review, and he succeeded. And the reason he succeeded is because they said the measures, first of all, didn't fall under the Municipal Act, and secondly, they were more punitive than remedial. So the things that they did in Whitchurch-Stouffville were very similar to what they did in Sarnia. I had no part in that, like once I do an investigation and out, but they worked with legal counsel. They did similar things. For example, his office was moved, that he had been in an admin area. They moved his office out of that area because that's where some of the harassment was occurring. So I think there may be an argument where you can tie it to the actual behavior, that those things would be upheld, but that was an interesting decision. Because those are some of the remedial things we've talked about. Harassment training. Well, if that one person won't go for training, then maybe you have to do it council as a whole and hope that they show up that time. You can request an apology from someone, but an apology is a feeling, and if I don't feel remorseful or regretful for what I did, an apology is meaningless. But you can talk about that. So some of the things, the other things that have been tried, placing limits on whether or not they can meet alone with staff. If the person who's at the receiving end of it is the CAO, sometimes we say, well, the CAO doesn't have to meet with that particular counselor alone. There needs to be somebody else in the room. Removing them from committees, making a public declaration, we do not tolerate this behavior. All of those things have been tried, including also restricting people's ability to be on site at certain times. And so I think the Whitchurch-Stouffville decision, when I look at it, is really because it was tied to a code of conduct investigation that was done by an integrity commissioner. Therefore, you're bound by the Municipal Act. But if it's something that's under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, then you have a duty to protect the safety of individuals. And so if some of those measures are necessary in order to protect the safety of individuals, they may be upheld. Okay, stand up for just a minute. Because it's stuffy in here, and we'll just like a little stretchy. But that's at the end.
Oh.
We finish with the group hug.
Harassment.
Not if it's welcome. I'm not saying it's welcome. All right, have a seat. So the last thing I want to talk about is what your contribution is. And I have some ideas, but the last thing we're going to do is you're going to commit to something that you are going to do for this term that will help contribute to a constructive and respectful council. But you will notice that I use the term elected official. There are terms that have baggage, and when you speak of people as politicians, there's a little negative baggage around that. And same with staff, speaking of the professional staff, not using demeaning language of a bunch of bureaucrats, things like that. So language does really matter. We think it doesn't matter, but it does really matter. And certain terms are more laden than others. So thinking about what we call each other. Stepping up. So if somebody's engaging in bad behavior and you're sitting beside them, maybe you're not doing it in front of the public, but at the end of the council meeting, you're walking out of the building, you can say, you know what? I know you didn't mean to cause harm, let them save face, right? I'm sure you didn't realize it, but that kind of, I think, made that person uncomfortable, that staff member. So, maybe engage in something else. So stepping up. There are no innocent bystanders. If you see it, you're part of the problem if you don't stop it. So making sure you do something. And taking responsibility for your own behavior. Owning your own response. So those things we talked about before, don't let things escalate. Don't be the hit and run person. So the hit and run person is the person that, okay, I might be guilty of this, wanting to get the last word in and then running out the door. So the other person can't speak, right? So giving people an opportunity to be heard as well as just speaking your own mind. And being aware of your contribution, being self-aware. Am I somebody that tends to get my back up when we talk about a certain issue? Maybe I need to take a deep breath and think about my own behavior. Some of these things we already talked about, but contributing wisely, so being prepared for meetings, reading things in advance, asking questions in advance. And one of the things I've noticed when we engage in debate is that sometimes we speak in absolute truths, like this is wrong, that doesn't make sense, this is not a good idea, and here are some terms to put in front of it that can be helpful from my perspective, in my opinion. So that's not an absolute truth, that's not saying I'm right and you're wrong, it's saying I have a viewpoint here, I'm expressing my viewpoint, I'm interested in understanding your perspective. So from my perspective, in my respectful opinion, are two things that go a long way to encouraging open debate without having people feel offended. We already talked about not avoiding difficult decisions, acting in solidarity and loyalty. So not leaking confidential information, not using social media to achieve your own political ends, not airing your dirty laundry in public. And respecting democracy, we talked about that as well. So have a vote, you make a decision, that's the vote of council, that's the decision. You don't walk out the door and start slamming everybody who voted in a different way than you did. And avoiding personal attacks, both inside and outside council. We talked about the staff one. Respecting the chain of command. So ultimately, the only person you can change is yourself. So I'm going to give you a little slip of paper, and on it you are going to write down something that is your commitment to creating a constructive council for this term. What are you going to do? And I'm going to give it to staff too, but what are you going to do that is going to help you to lead together? We've talked about different things you can do, different things you need from each other. And I have a little bag, and I'm going to come around and grab them. So you're doing this anonymously. You don't need to put your name on it, but we will read out a few.
I'll email you mine.
Okay, sorry about that. Whispered in my
Do you want me to scribe for you, Matthew? I can definitely help with that.
I don't trust you, but I trust John.
Okay, Don, you scribe for him. Okay.
My paper's tiny. How can I fit everything I'm gonna do on that?
Look at here, you can have this giant chart paper.
One word.
Did you say one word?
No, one thing. A sentence, a phrase.
You're gonna be like mindful.
Yeah, yeah, no, all right, go ahead.
Ready?
Concise?
I don't know if I spelled it right.
I was going to say,
The
I would have done a way better job scribing than Matthew.
No way.
but,
It's probably spelled-
Well, you can all have treats before you go.
Like
I
that.
am melting in here.
Trying to be concise.
Okay, we have to open that door again. There's just a little bit of talking.
Gerald, can you maybe open that door if you don't mind, please?
No problem. Here you go, Don. That's how you spell that.
I didn't do too bad.
Did most of the letters, right?
Yeah, that's right.
In the wrong place.
I think I added an extra one though.
Oh, well.
All right,
Spell check.
Right here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna read a few and see what we got. See if we got anything good. I'm gonna go stand outside because I'm also having a hot flash. Okay. Always respect others' opinions when different than mine. I will provide open and honest communication. I'm going to assume the best. I will try to be concise. I wonder if that's somebody who isn't normally concise. I will provide useful, knowledgeable information. I've got 2 more here to read. I will respect each perspective. And I will be patient. So these are very good. So now your job is to remember what that commitment is that you are going to make to creating a constructive council, to leading together effectively. Does anyone have any questions before we conclude? Anything else that you want to talk about that we didn't talk about in this session?
One in the bags too.
Oh, there is.
There was a few, I didn't read them all. I wasn't intending to, but why don't we, since there's only 3 left? Read all the relevant material that's underlined and be prepared for meetings. I will listen carefully to the viewpoint of staff and peers, and I will listen to other opinions. Very good. Okay.
He's our detail guy.
Detail guy?
He counted how many went in.
I'm a big picture person. I never notice the details. Okay, I'm going to pass around an evaluation form if you don't mind completing it. I'm doing this with other councils, so any feedback that you can give me, greatly appreciated.
I didn't go.
Another meeting in January?
No?
No,
Why not?
doesn't matter.